Alrighty, you all ready? Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and today comes the final installment of Acceptance, which is the final book in the final trilogy of the Southern Reach trilogy or Area X trilogy, if you prefer, by Jeff VanderMeer. I finally got the capitalization on his last name right today. Yay! He's writing a fourth book. Ah! I don't know when that's going to be out. Last update, I think, or comment that he made on it anywhere online that I saw, but didn't look very hard, was back in like 2020 or 2021. So who knows when that'll be around. Um, I'm not going to hold my breath because asphyxiation sounds like a bad way to go, personally. But other than that, let's see. Oh, shoot. I started with the wrong cover, I think. Let me double check. Yeah, I started with the wrong piece of artwork. Yeah. Lots of people have made a similar comment. Um, this cover will make sense, I promise. Um, it's Derpy Shark. A lot of people have made a similar comment. I tend to agree. If you are taking it in the context of the series that it's meant to be, or just the book itself, um, it, as a if you're taking it to be representative of the series, it is not. It does not do that very well. With that said, it could have been a lot worse. It's very Hollywoodified. I am not going to defend the movie. I think as a suspenseful horror romp, Hollywood romp, it's pretty good. Um, but compared to the source material, it just isn't. It just isn't. That's it. Um, it does get a bonus point from me for having lots of fractals in the credit sequence. Um, Mandelbrot sequences and the like. But I just think they look neat. Uh, but as a representative bit of the whole, it's not. It could have been worse, but it could have been a. I guess part of the difficulty is I don't really know how you would easily transition it to a silver screen format. Oh yeah, Jason Pope. No, no problem, no problem. Uh, I One thing I'll make very clear is like there is no pressure whatsoever to watch live at all. Like they're not gonna pay me for this, so it's like you look at what you need to do in order to monetize stuff on say YouTube, for instance, and it's just like, well, that's a ridiculous racket. Why would how would you even do that? Like film yourself killing someone? I don't really know. Um, so I don't care. If you're watching it after the fact, please. No spoilers here. I will give a minor spoiler here and say that you are probably going to be left with more questions than answers by the end of this, even if you have been keeping up. It's um, it's quite a series. It's quite a book. But yeah, uh, it is what it is. I definitely understand the frustration with the Annihilation movie. I was kind of like, huh, I don't remember this being what I read, but that's fine. And then I went and I reread it and was like, yeah, no, not particularly. But at the same time, I think it got some of the vibe down. I don't really know why they had to have like an alien walking around at the end. That was just sort of silly. Um, that didn't work. Some of the visual ideas it had weren't bad, I feel, but as a whole, didn't quite get there. Anyway, I need to rewatch the movie and see if it holds up even worse. It probably does. Anyway, so previously on, let's see. Previously on, let's see. Grace, Control, and Ghostbird are now going to the tower slash tunnel, the topographic anomaly. We have learned that very probably Jack and or Jackie Severance were involved in the SNS Bureau, Seance and or the SNSB, Seance and Science Brigade. Sorry. Um, probably was involved in the Seance and Science Brigade. Probably was also involved uh, in the creation of Area X, though goodness knows why. I don't think we ever find out why in this book. Maybe that's what the fourth book does. Um, it doesn't really matter why it is. And yeah, what other thing happened? Something else happened. Oh yeah, young child Gloria has left the before the events of Area X taking hold. This portion is probably going to be a little anticlimactic in some ways. I'm not saying that as oh it's such a letdown. It's not. It's not. It's just the really 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 dramatic stuff has already happened, and everything from here is kind of like wow okay, where do we go from here? Um, the really 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 dramatic being our good friend the biologist is a sea beast, possibly an interdimensional sea beast, which is really cool. Uh, more on that later if I remember to talk about it. Yeah, I think we're good. Let's get cracking. Thanks to everyone tuning in. If you're not tuning in, don't worry about it. Watch it after the fact. That's why they're all up on the YouTube. Okay. Zero zero 021. The Lighthouse Keeper. Went back to the garden, illegible, and kept the axe with me just in case. Unlikely, with black bears, but not unknown. Scrub jay, catbird, house sparrow, most humble of God's creatures. I sat there and fed it breadcrumbs, for it was a scrawny thing and in need. I shall bring them forth, they said. Saul stayed on to the bitter end at the village bar, not sure if it was because he wanted to test Brad's resolve or because he didn't want to walk outside only to encounter Henry, or because he was sad Charlie'd had to leave. So he knocked back a couple more beers, put down the way the room swayed to the booze, and ordered some oysters and fish and chips. He had a hunger in him that was rare. Food didn't interest him that much, but tonight he felt ravenous. The oysters were served in their own salt water, newly shucked and steamed, and he didn't bother dipping them in sauce, but just gulped them down. Then he tore into the fish, which came away in thick flakes in his hands, the heat rising along with the saliva-inducing smell of the grease. The wedge fries he drowned in ketchup, and they soon joined the fish. He was frantic at his feast, aware he was gobbling, stuffing his face, his hands moving at a frenzied, unnatural pace, but he couldn't stop. He ordered another fish and After the last set, the musicians stuck around, but most of the others left, including Trudy. The black sea and sky outside the window peered in against the glass, smudged faces and the bottles of booze behind the bar reflected back at Saul. Now that it was just old Jim at the piano, with the other musicians goofing around, and so few people he could just about hear the pulse of the sea again, could recognize it as a subtle message in the background. Or something was pulsing in his head. His sense of smell had intensified. The rotting sweetness that must be coming from the kitchen was like a perfume being sprayed in clouds throughout the room. A stitching beat beneath the striking of the piano keys twinned itself to the pulse. Mundane details struck him as momentous. The worm of gray-white ash curling out of an ashtray on the table next to him, the individual flakes still fluming, fluttering, and at the buried core a pinprick of throbbing red that pulsed at him like a brake light. Beside the ash, the smudge of an old greasy thumbprint, immortalized by the gunk that had collected on the ashtray from hundreds of cigarette immolations. Beside the thumbprint, an attempt to etch something into the side of the ashtray, an effort that had ended after J and A. The piano playing became discordant, or was he just hearing it better? Or worse? On his stool against the wall, beer in hand, he contemplated that. Contemplated the way people's voices were getting confused, as if they'd become mixed up, and the thrum rising under his skin, the thrum and hum and the ringing in his ears. It felt like something was coming toward him from very far away, toward and into him. His throat was dry and chalky. His beer tasted funny. He put it down, looked around the room. Old Jim couldn't stop playing the piano, although he did it so badly, fingers too hard against the keys smudged with his red blood as he now began to roar out a song Saul had never heard before, with lyrics that were incomprehensible. The other musicians, most of them seated around old Jim, let their instruments fall from slack hands and stared at one another as if shocked by something. What were they shocked by? Sadie was weeping, and Brad was saying, "Why would you do that? Why in the hell would you be doing that?" But Brad's voice was coming out of Sadie's body, and blood was dripping out of Brad's left ear, and the people slumped at the bar proper. Had they been slumped that way a moment before? Were they drunk or dead? Old Jim erupted out of his seat to stand, still playing. He was reaching a chaotic crescendo on his shouting, shrieking, yowling song, his fingers destroyed joint by joint as blood smashed out from the piano onto his lap and down onto the floor. Something was hovering above Saul. Something was emanating out of him, was broadcasting through him, on frequencies too high to hear. "What are you doing to me? Why are you staring at me? Stop doing that! I'm not doing anything!" Someone was crawling across the floor, or pulling themselves across the floor because their legs didn't work. Someone was bashing their head against the dark glass near the front door. Sadie spun and twitched and twisted on the floor, slamming into chairs and table legs, beginning to come to pieces. Outside, utter night reigned. There was no light. There was no light. Saul got up. Saul walked to the door, the spray of old Jim's incomprehensible song less a roar than a trickling scream. What lay beyond the door he did not know, mistrusted the utter darkness as much as what lay behind him, but he could not stay there in the bar, whether it was all real or something he was hallucinating. He had to leave. He turned the knob, went out into the cooling nighttime air of the parking lot. Everything was in its rightful place, as normal as it could be, with no one in sight. But everything behind him, in there, was awry, wrong, too irrevocable to be fixed by anyone. The din had become worse, and now others were screaming too, making sounds not capable of being made by human mouths. He managed to find his pickup truck. He managed to get his key in the ignition, put it in reverse, then drive out of the parking lot. The sanctuary of the lighthouse was only half a mile away. He did not look in his rearview mirror, did not want to see anything that might spill out into the night. The stars were so distant and yet so close in the dark sky above. You're good, Warren. We've only gotten one chapter done, and it's the wow, everything went horribly, horribly wrong chapter. Not in my reading, but it's the beginning. The beginning of Area X's footprint. 0022, Ghostbird. During much of the descent, the strong feeling of a return to what was already known came to Ghostbird, even if experienced by another. A memory of drowning, of endless drowning, and, at the remove of those unreliable words from the biologist's journal, the end of what she had encountered, what she had suffered, what she had recovered. And Ghostbird wanted none of it. Didn't want control either, following behind. He wasn't suited for this, had not been meant to experience this. You couldn't martyr yourself to Area X. You could only disappear trying, and not even be sure of that. If the biologist had not leaned in to stare at those words so long ago, the doppelganger might not exist in this way, full of memories and sneaking down into the depths. She might have returned with a mind wiped clean, her difference not expressed through her role as the mirror of the biologist, but instead as a function of the right time or the wrong place, the right place or the wrong time. Such strange comfort that the words on the wall were the same, the method of their expression the same, if now she might interpret it as a nostalgic hint of an alien ecosystem, an approach or stance that the crawler and the tower, in concert, had failed to inflict upon Earth. Because it wasn't viable? Because that was not its purpose? And because that was not its purpose, and thus giving them instead these slim signs of where it came from, what it stood for, what it thought? She had rejected a mask filter, and with it the idea that somehow Area X was only concentrated here, in this cramped space, on these stairs, in the phosphorescent words with which she had become too familiar. Area X was all around them. Area X was contained in no one place or figure. It was the dysfunction in the sky. It was the plant Control had spoken of. It was the heavens and earth. It could interrogate you from any position or no position at all, and you might not even recognize its actions as a form of questioning. Ghostbird did not feel powerful as they descended through the luminescent light, hugging the right-hand wall, but she was unafraid. There came the overlay, in memory and in the moment, of the harsh revolution of a mighty engine or heartbeat, and she knew even Control could hear it, could guess at its identity. From there they moved swiftly to that point from which there was no real return, the moment when they would see the monster and take its measure. It lay, all too soon, right around the corner. "I want you to stay here," she said to Control, to John. No, he said, as she'd known he would. No, I won't. An unexpected sweetness in his expression, a kind of weary resolve in the words. John Rodriguez, if you come with me, I won't be able to spare you. You'll have to see everything. Your eyes will have to be open. She could not deny him his name, here, at the end of it all. She could not deny him the right to die, if it came to that. There was nothing left to say. Trailing memory, trailing control, Ghostbird descended toward the light. The crawler was huge, seemed to rise and keep rising, to spread to the sides until it filled Ghostbird's vision. There was none of the remembered distortion, no throwing back at her own no no throwing back at her of her own fears or desires. It simply lay revealed before her, so immense, so shockingly concrete. The surface of its roughly bell-shaped body was translucent, but with a strange texture, like sheets of frozen water with finger-like polyps shining through. Underneath, a second surface slowly revolved, and across this centrifuge she could see the patterns floating along, as if it had an interior skin, and the material on top of that might be some kind of soft armor. There was a mesmerizing quality to that movement, distant cousin to the director's hypnotism, and she didn't dare let her gaze linger for long. The crawler had no discernible features, no discernible face. It moved so slowly as it perfected the letters on the wall that there was a strange impression of the delicate, the mysteries of its locomotion hidden beneath the fringe of flesh that extended to the ground. The left arm, the only arm, located halfway up its body, moved with unfailing precision, constant blurred motion, to create the message on the wall, more like a wielder than a writer. With a crash of sparks she knew was stray tissue igniting. Its arm was the agent of the message, and from that instrument flowed the letters. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner, I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead. If ever it had been human, then that thick scrawling arm, obscured by loam or moss, was all that was left of its humanity. 3 rings orbited the crawler, circling clockwise, and at times waves and surges of energy discharged between them, rippled across the crawler's body. The first ring spun in drunken, dreamlike revolutions just below the arm, an irregular row of half-moons. They resembled delicate jellyfish, with feathery white tendrils descending that continually writhed in a wandering search for something never found. The second ring, spinning faster right above the writing arm, resembled a broad belt of tiny black stones grouped close together, but these stones, as they bumped into one another, gave with a sponginess that made her think of soft tadpoles and of the creatures that had rained from the sky on the way to the island. What function these entities performed, whether they were part of the crawler's anatomy or a symbiotic species, she could not fathom. All she knew was that both rings were in their way reassuringly corporeal. But the third ring, the halo-like ring above the crawler, did not reassure her at all. The swift-moving globes of gold numbered 10 to 12, appeared to be both lighter than air and yet heavier too. They spun with a ferocious velocity, so that at first she almost could not tell what they were. But she knew that they were dangerous, that words like defense and aggression might apply. Perhaps the lighthouse keeper had always been a delusion, a lie written Sorry. Perhaps the lighthouse keeper had always been a delusion, a lie written by Area X and conveyed back to the biologist. Yet she distrusted, too, this avatar, this monster costume, this rubber suit meant for a scientist's consumption. So precise, so specific. Or perhaps the truth, for it did not fluctuate in its aspect, morph into other forms. Nothing but a horror show, Ghostbird said to Control, so still and silent behind her, absorbing or being absorbed. What else was she to do? She stepped forward, into the gravitational field of its orbits. This close, the translucent layer was more like a microscope slide of certain kinds of long, irregularly shaped cells. The patterns beneath, on the second layer, she could almost read, but remained obscured, as if in shallows disturbed by wide ripples. She reached out a hand, felt a delicate fluttering against her fingers, as though encountering a porous layer, a veil. Was this first contact or last contact? Her touch triggered a response. The halo far above dissolved to allow one of its constituent parts to peel off like a drooping golden pearl as large as her head, and down it came to a halt in front of her, hovering there to assess her, reading her with a kind of warmth that felt like sunburn. Yet she was not afraid. She would not be afraid. Area X had made her. Area X must have expected her. Ghostbird reached out and plucked the golden pearl from the air, held it warm and tender in her hand. A brilliant gold-green light erupted from the globe and plunged into the heart of her, and an icy calm came over her, and through the calm bled a kind of monumental light, and in that light she could see all that could be revealed even as Area X peered in at her. She saw or felt, deep within, the cataclysm like a rain of comets that had annihilated an entire biosphere remote from Earth. Witnessed how one made organism had fragmented and dispersed, each minute part on each minute part sorry, each minute part undertaking a long and perilous passage through spaces between, black and formless, punctuated by sudden light as they came to rest, scattered and lost, emerging only to be buried, inert, in the glass of a lighthouse lens. And how, when brought out of dormancy, the wire tripped, how it had, best as it could, regenerated, begun to perform a vast and preordained function, one compromised by time and context, by the terrible truth that the species that had given Area X its purpose were gone. She saw the membranes of Area X, this machine, this creature, saw the white rabbits leaping into the border, disappearing, and coming out into another place. The leviathans, the ghosts, watching from beyond. All of this in fragments through taste or smell or senses she didn't entirely understand. While the crawler continued in its writing as if she did not exist, the words ablaze with a richer and more meaningful light than she had ever seen, and worlds shone out from them. So many worlds, so much light, that only she could see. Each word a world bleeding through from some other place, a conduit and an entry point, if you only knew how to use them, the coordinates the biologist now used in her far journeying. Her far journeying, sorry. Each sentence a merciless healing, a ruthless rebuilding that could not be denied. Should she now say, "Stop"? Should she now plead for people she had never met, who lived in her head, who the biologist had known? Should she somehow think that what came next would destroy the planet or save it? In its recognition of her, Ghostbird knew that something would survive, that she would survive. What could she do? Nothing. Nor did she want to. There was a choice in not making a choice. She released the sphere, let it hover there in the air. She sensed Grace on the stairs behind them, sensed that Grace meant harm, and didn't care. It wasn't Grace's fault. Grace could not possibly understand what she was seeing, was seeing something else, something from back at the lighthouse or the island or her life before. Grace shot Ghostbird through the back. The bullet came out of her chest, lodged in the wall. The halo above the crawler spun more furiously. Ghostbird turned, shouted at her with the full force of the brightness. For she was not injured, had felt nothing, did not want Grace hurt. Grace, frozen there in the half-light, rifle poised, and now in her eyes the knowledge that this was futile, that this had always been futile, that there was no turning back, that there could be no return. "Go back, Grace," Ghostbird said, and Grace disappeared up the steps as if she'd never been there. Then Ghostbird realized, too late, that Control was no longer there, had either gone back up or had snuck past, down the stairs, headed for the blinding white light far below. "0023. The Director." You return to what you knew, or thought you knew. The lighthouse and the Seance and Science Brigade, reinvigorated due to the line item linking the S&SB and Jack Severance. You comb through every file 3 or 4 times, force yourself to once again review the history of the lighthouse and its ruined sister on the island. Oh, whoops, I meant to switch book covers. There we go. At odd moments you see Henry's face, a pale circle from a great distance, moving closer and closer until you can catalogue every unsavory detail. You don't know what he means, only know only that Henry is not someone to be cast aside too quickly. He nags at you like an unopened letter that everyone has, with overconfidence, predicted will contain something banal. Your antipathy toward them made you dismissive as a child. You hadn't been looking for ways to emblazon them in your memory, to capture details, but instead to banish them, edit them out, make them go away. This annoyance, this presence that you could tell made Saul uncomfortable, even uneasy. But what about them had made Saul feel that way? No Henry, no Suzanne that looked like them appeared on the lists of the S&SB members. No stray photos with members unidentified leapt out to reveal either of them. Prior investigations had tracked down the names and addresses of any member assigned to the Forgotten Coast, and exhaustive interviews had been conducted. The answers were the same. S&SB had been conducting standard research, the usual mix of the scientific and the preternatural. Anyone who knew anything else had been trapped inside and disappeared long before the first expedition stumbled through the corridor into Area X. Worse, no further hint of Severance, Jack or Jackie, the latter also making herself scarce in the flesh, as if something new has caught her attention or she knows you want to question her, with each phone call fading into the backdrop, further subsumed by Central. So that you redouble your efforts to find her influence in the files, but if Lowry haunts you, Severance is the kind of ghost that's too smart to materialize. Once again, you watch the video from the first expedition. Again, study the background, the things out of focus, at the lighthouse. Through a flickering time lapse and sequencing, you review a kind of evolution and devolution of the lighthouse from inception through the last photograph taken by an expedition. To the point that Grace takes you aside one day and says, "This is enough. You need to run this agency. Other people can review these files." "What other people? What other people are you talking about?" You snap at her and then instantly regret it. But there are no other people, and time is running out. You have to remember that on some level. The entire southern reach has become a long con. And if you forget that, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Oh, okay, let's try that again with the right emphasis on the correct syllable. But there are no other people, and time is running out. You have to remember that, on some level, the entire southern reach has become a long con. And if you forget that, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Maybe you need time off, some rest, Grace tells you. Maybe you need to get some perspective. You can't have my job. I do not want your fucking job. She's simmering. She's about to boil over. And some part of you wants to see that, wants to know what Grace is like when she's totally lost it. But if you push her to that, she'll have lost you too. Later, you go up to the rooftop with a bottle of bourbon, and Grace is already there, in one of the deck chairs. The Southern Reach building is nothing but a big, ponderous ship, and you don't know where the helm has gotten to, can't even lash yourself to the wheel. "I don't mean anything I'm saying most of the time," you tell her. "Just remember I don't mean anything I say." A dismissive sound, but also arms unfolding, grim frown loosening up. "This place is a fucking nuthouse." Grace rarely swears anywhere but on the roof. "A nut job." Paraphrasing Cheney's latest puzzled, hurt soliloquy about lack of good data. "Even a fallen acorn tells us something about where it fell from, Newton would tell us, wouldn't you say? There'd be a trajectory, for heck's sake, and then you'd backtrack, even if theoretical, find some point on the tree that acorn came from, or near enough." You can't say you've ever understood more than a third of his ellipticals. "A white tits nut job," Grace says, referring to the frozen white tents of the Southern Reach Border Command and Control. "Our white tits nut job," you say sternly, wagging a finger. "But at least not nut jobs like the water feature crew." After Cheney's outburst, you went over yet another pointless, non-productive report from the Water Feature Crew, the agency studying radio waves for signals from extraterrestrial life. Central has suggested more than once that you team up with them. They listen for messages from the stars, across a sliver of two microwave regions unencumbered by radio waves from natural sources. These frequencies they call the water hole because they correspond to hydrogen and hydroxyl wavelengths. A fool's chance to assume that other intelligent species would automatically gravitate to the watering hole, as they called it. While what they were looking for snuck in the back door, set up the back door and walked through it. You're looking up and meanwhile something walks by and steals your wallet, Grace says, cackling. "Water feature built for nothing. They prefer the servants' entrance, thank you very much," you say grandly, passing the bourbon. "You don't just turn on the sprinklers and pump up the slip and slide." You truly don't know what you're saying anymore, but Grace bursts into laughter, and then things are all right again with Grace, for a while, and you can go back to Henry and Suzanne, the talking mannequins, the deathly dull or just deathly twins. But at some point that same week, Grace finds you throwing file folders against the far wall, and you've no excuse for it except a shrug. Bad day at the doctor's. Bad day prepping for the expedition. Bad day doing research. Just a bad day in a succession of bad days. So, you do something about it. You fly out to Lowry's headquarters about 1 month before the 12th expedition. Even though it's your idea, you're unhappy you have to travel, had hoped to lure Lowry to the southern reach one last time. Everything around you, your office, the conversation in the corridors, the view from beyond reach, has acquired a kind of compelling sheen to it, a clarity that comes from knowing you will soon be gone. Lowry's in the final stages of his pre-expedition performance. He has been exporting the less invasive of his techniques to Central. He enjoys impersonating an instructor for the benefit of expedition members, according to Severance. The biologist, she reassures you, has suffered minimal meddling. The only thing you want ratcheted up in the biologist is her sense of alienation from other people. All you want is that she become as attuned inward to Area X as possible. You're not even sure she really needs your push in that regard, from all reports. No one in the history of the program has so willingly given up the use of her name. Light hypnotic suggestion, conditioning that's more about Area X survival than any of Lowry's dubious value adds, his claims to have found a way around the need, on some level, for the subject to want to perform the suggested action. A kind of trickery and substitution. The stages you've seen described are identification, indoctrination, reinforcement, and deployment, but Grace has seen other documents that borrow the semiotics of the supernatural: manifestation, infestation, oppression, and possession. Most of Lowry's attention has accreted around the linguist, a volunteer with radicalized ideas about the value of free will. You wonder if Lowry prefers it when there's more or less resistance. So you absorb the brunt of his briefing, his report on progress, his teasing taunt about whether you've reconsidered his offer of hypnosis, of conditioning, with the hint behind it that you couldn't stop him if you tried. Honestly, you don't give a shit about his briefing. At some point, you steer Lowry toward the idea of a walk, down by the fake lighthouse. It's early summer, the weather still balmy, and there's no reason to sit there in Lowry's command and control lounge. You cajole him into it by appealing to his pride, asking for the full tour, taking just one thin file folder you've brought with you. So he gives you the not-so-grand tour through this miniaturized world of ever-decreasing wonder. There's the strange kitschy quality of piped-in music through speakers hidden around the grounds. A distant but cheery tune, not pop, not jazz, not classical, but something all the more menacing for being jaunty. At the top of the quaint little lighthouse, what would Saul think of it? He points out that the day mark is accurate, as well as the fucking glass shards somebody added later. When he pulls the trapdoor open at the top, what's revealed in the room below are piles and piles of empty journals and loose blank pages, as if he's bought a stationery store as a side business. The lens isn't functional either, but as if by way of apology, you get a history lesson. Back in the day, way back in the day, they used to just shove a big fucking fatty bird onto a stake and light it on fire for a beacon. That goddamn hole in the ground, as Lowry puts it, is the least accurate part. An old gunnery position with the gun unit ripped out, leaving the granite-lined dark circle that leads down a ladder to a tunnel that then doubles back to the hill behind you. That houses most of Lowry's installations. You climb down only a little ways, enough to see, framed on the dank walls, Lowry's art gallery. The blurry, out-of-focus photographs, blown up, brought back by various expeditions. A kind of meta-version of the tunnel brought to the faux tunnel, displaying with confidence something unknowable. Thinking of Saul on the steps of the real tunnel, turning towards you, and feeling such an acute contempt for Lowry that you have to remain there, looking down, for long moments, afraid it will show on your face. After you've made the right noises about how impressive it all is, you suggest continuing along the shore, fresh air and nature, and then Lowry acquiesces, defeated by your tactic of asking a question about each new thing ahead because he just cannot shut up about his own cleverness. You take a side path that leads north along the water. There are geese nesting on the nearby rocky point that give you both the stink eye, an otter in the sea in the middle distance, shadowing you. Eventually, you turn the conversation to the S&SB. You pull out a piece of paper, the line item linked to Jack Severance. You point it out to him even though it's highlighted in hot pink. You present it as this funny thing, this thing Lowry must have known about too, given his secret debriefing of your childhood experiences when you first joined the Southern Reach. Is that the reason you and Jackie are working together? You ask. That the S&SB had a link to Central through Jack? Lowry considers that question, a kind of smirk on his craggy face. A smirk and a look down at the ground and back up at you.
Is that all we're out here for? For that? Jesus, I might have given you that in a fucking phone call.
Not much, I guess, you say. Sheepish smile, offered up to a raging wolf of a narcissist. But I'd like to know. Before you cross the border. A hesitation, a sideways glance that's appraising you hard for some hidden motivation, or some next move that maybe he can't see. Prodding. A side project? The S&SB is side project of Central, or...
Sure, why not? Lowry says, relaxing. The usual kind of dependent clause that could be excised at any time. No harm done.
But sometimes the ancillary infected the primary. Sometimes the host and the parasite got confused about their roles, as the biologist might have put it. It's how you got the photograph of me at the lighthouse. Not a question.
Very good, he says, genuinely delighted. Too fucking true. I was on a mission to find evidence to make sure you stayed true. And then I wondered how come that was in Central's files in the first place, and not over at the Southern Reach. Wondered where it originated, and then I found that very same line item.
Except Lowry had a higher security clearance, could access information you and Grace couldn't get your hands on. That was smart of you. Really smart. Lowry puffs up, chest sticking out, aware he's being flattered, but can't help the self-parody that's not really parody at all. Because where's the harm? You're on the way out. He's probably already thinking about replacements. There we go. You haven't bothered putting Grace's name forward, have been working on Jackie's severance in that regard instead. Meaning she's working on Jackie's severance to get Grace installed as replacement director. Which is going to turn out to be a bit of a mistake, or irrelevant, or moot, because of what Jackie Severance is going to wind up doing with her son.
The idea was straightforward, the way Jack told it. The S&SB was kind of batshit crazy, low probability, but if there actually was anything uncanny or alien in the world, we should monitor it, should be aware of it. Maybe influence or nudge it a bit, provide the right materials and guidance. And if troublemakers or undesirables joined the group, that's a good way to monitor potential subversives too. And also a good cover for getting into places hidden in plain sight. For surveillance, a methodology Central was keen on back then. A lot of anti-government types along the Forgotten Coast.
Did we recruit, or...?
Some operatives embedded. And some folks we persuaded to work for us because they liked the idea of playing spy. Some folks who got a thrill out of it. Didn't need a deeper reason, like God and country. Probably just as well.
Was Jackie involved too?
Jack wasn't just protecting himself, Lowry says. When Jackie was starting out, she helped him a bit, and then she came to the Southern Reach later and helped Jack again to make sure none of this came out. Except I found out, as I do sometimes, as you know.
Ever come across a Henry or Suzanne in the files?
Never any names in what I saw, just code names like, I don't know, Big Hauler and Spooky Action and Damned Pork Chop. That kind of crap.
But none of this is the real question, the first of the real questions. Did the SNSB facilitate, knowingly or unknowingly, the creation of Area X? Lowry looks both stunned and amused beyond reason or good sense.
No, of course not. No. That's why Jack could keep it a secret, snuff it out. Strictly in the wrong place at the wrong time, because otherwise I would have taken measures.
But you think he meant to say, would have killed them all.
And it turns out Jack was running it mostly on his own initiative, which is something I think we can both appreciate, right?
Above you loom the old barracks, the warrens, gun slits from concrete bunkers. Do you believe Lowry? No, you don't. The little gravel beach where you both stand is some distance from the fake lighthouse. It has a fringe of anemic grass and, right before the water, a line of rocks covered in white lichen. The brilliant sun for a moment becomes lost in a depression of clouds and shadow, the pale blue surface of the sea a sudden gray. The otter that has been trailing you has come closer. Its constant chattering monologue of clicks and whistles Lowry finds somehow disrespectful, perhaps because of prior encounters. He starts yelling at the otter, and the otter keeps talking and popping up somewhere unexpected so Lowry can never adjust to throw the pebble he plans on caroming off the otter's head. You sit down on the rocks, watch the show.
Goddamn fucking creature. Goddamn stupid fucking animal.
The otter shows off a fish it's caught, swimming on its back, eyes full of a kind of laughter, if that's possible. The otter skims and zags and disappears and comes back up. Lowry's pebbles skip and plop without effect, the otter apparently thinking it's a game. But it's a game that bores the otter after a while, and it submerges for a long time, Lowry standing there with one hand on his hip, the other a fist around a rock, searching for a new ripple in the water, seeming to want to guess how long the otter can hold its breath, what range of options the animal has for where it can come up for air. Blech. Except it never reappears, and Lowry's left standing there, holding a rock. Is Lowry a monster? He is monstrous in your eyes, because you know that by the time his hold on Central, the parts of Central he wants to make laugh and dance the way he wants them to dance and laugh. Wait, let's retry that again. Is Lowry a monster? He is monstrous in your eyes, because you know that by the time his hold on Central, the parts of Central he wants to make laugh and dance the way he wants them to laugh and dance, by the time this hold, the doubling and mirroring, has waned, as most reigns of terror do, the signs of his hand, his will have irrevocably fallen across so many places. His ghost will haunt so much for so many years to come, imprint upon so many minds, that if the details about the man known as Lowry are suddenly purged from all the systems, those systems will still reconstruct his image from the very force and power of his impact. You take out a photo of the cell phone, nudge his arm with it, make him take it. Lowry blanches, tries to hand back the photograph, but you're going to make him keep it. He's stuck holding it and the rock meant for the otter. He drops the rock, but won't look at the photograph again. Lowry, I think you lied about this phone. I think this is your phone, from the first expedition. You've a sense as you say the words that you're going too far, but you'll be going even farther soon.
You don't know that's my phone.
It's got a long history now. Lowry,
No.
stark, final, letting in no light, a kind of self-damnation. No protest, no outrage, none of the usual Lowry drama.
No.
Without any way to pry loose some light between the letters of that word, so you'll have to try by yourself across the border. Are you working for them? Is that the problem? You leave the them vague on purpose.
For them?
A laugh that burned.
Why? Is there a problem with the phone?
Still not an admission. Does Area X have unfinished business with you? Is there something you haven't told us about the first expedition?
Nothing that would help you.
Bitter now. Directed at you for ambushing him, or someone else. Lowry, if you don't tell me whether or not this is your cell phone, I am going to go to Central and tell them all about the SNSB, all about where I came from, how you covered it up. I'm going to scuttle you for good. I really hope nobody can hear that. Probably everybody can hear that. Lawnmowers are loud, okay? That's a ways away, too. That's like not immediately proximate. That's like, it's not a quarter mile, but it's like an eighth of a mile away. It's not very far. I can see the lawnmower, but it is not nearby. It is carrying. Carrying on the wind. I'm going to scuttle you for good.
You'd be done for yourself then.
I'm done for anyway. You know that. Lowry gives you a look that's equal parts aggression and some secret hurt coming to the surface.
I get it now, Gloria, he says. You're going on a suicide mission and you just want everything out in the open, even if it's unimportant. Well, you should know that if you share with anyone,
Your corrupted data, you tell him. If we used your own techniques on you, Lowry, what would we find in your brain, coiled up in there?
How the fuck dare you?
He's trembling with anger, but he's not moving. He's not retreating 1 inch. It's not a denial, although it probably should be. Guilt? Does Lowry believe in guilt? Pushing now, probing now, not certain if what you're saying is true. While on the first expedition, did you communicate with them? With Area X?
I wouldn't call it communication. It's all in the files you've already seen.
What did you see? How did you see it? Were we doomed when you came back, or before?
There will never be a grand unified theory, Gloria. We will never find it. Not in our lifetime, and it'll be too late.
Lowry, trying to confuse things, escaped the spotlight.
You know, they're looking at water on the moons of Jupiter right now, out there in our not-so-secret sister organizations. There might be a secret sea out there. There might be life right under our noses. But there's always been life right under our noses. We're just too blind to see it. These fucking questions, they don't matter.
Jim, this is evidence of contact. Finding this particular cell phone in Area X. That it indicates recognition and understanding of some kind.
No, random. Random. Random.
It wants to talk to you, Jim. Area X wants to talk to you. It wants to ask you a question, doesn't it? You don't know if this is true, but you're sure it'll scare the shit out of Lowry. You have the sense of a time delay in Lowry, a gap or distance between the two of you that is very, very wide. Something ancient shines out of his eyes, peers out at you.
I won't go back,
He says. That's not an answer.
Yes, it's my phone. It's my fucking phone.
Are you seeing Lowry as he was right after coming back from the first expedition? How long could a person hold to a pattern, a process, despite being fundamentally damaged? Whitby telling you, I think this is an asylum, but so is the rest of the world. Don't you get tired after a while, you ask him, of always moving forward but never reaching the end? Of never being able to tell the truth to anyone?
You know, Gloria, he says, you'll never really understand what it was like that first time, going out through that door in the border, coming back. Not if you cross the border 1,000 times. We were offered up and we were lost. We were passing through a door of ghosts into a place of spirits, and asked to deal with that for the rest of our lives.
And what if Area X comes looking for you? There's still that remoteness to Lowry's gaze, as if he's not really there, standing in front of you, but he's done, pushed to his limit, stalks off without even a glance back. You will never see him again, ever. And that temporary relief puts juice in your step as the sun returns, as the otter returns, and you sit by the shore and watch the animal cavort and frolic for a few minutes that you hope will never end. Zero zero 24. The Lighthouse Keeper.
Bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that gather in the darkness. Heard during the night, screech owl, nighthawk, a few foxes. A blessing, a relief.
At the lighthouse, the beacon was dark. The beacon was dark, and something was trying to spill out of him or course through him on its way to somewhere else. The shadows of the abyss are like the petals of a monstrous flower that shall blossom within the skull and expand the mind beyond what any man can bear. But whether it decays under the earth or above on green fields, or out to sea or in the very air, all shall come to revelation and to revel in the knowledge of the strangling fruit. He was still in shock from the bar, kept believing that if he went back it would prove to be some kind of waking vision, or even a terrible joke. The smashing of old Jim's bloody fingers against the piano keys. Sadie's look of being undone, betrayed by her own words. Brad, standing there, gaze locked on the wall as if someone had frozen him in place. Thank God Trudy had already left. What would he tell Gloria when he saw her again? What would he tell Charlie? Saul parked the truck, stumbled to the lighthouse, unlocked the door, slammed it behind him, and stood in the entrance breathing hard. He'd call the police, tell them to come to the bar, to check on poor old Jim and the others. He'd call the police, and then he'd try to get a hold of Charlie out at sea, and then call anyone else he could think of. Because something terrible must be happening here, something beyond his illness. But no one answered. No one answered. The phone was dead. He could run, but where to? The light had gone out. The light had gone out. Armed with a flare gun, Saul stumbled up the stairs, one hand against the wall to keep his balance. The splinter was an insect bite. Or an overture. An intruder. Or nothing, nothing to do with this. As he slipped and almost fell, some kind of moisture on the steps, a fuzziness on the wall that came away in his hands, that he had to brush off against his jeans. The Light Brigade. They'd given him an experimental drug or exposed him to radiation with their equipment. And the hand of the sinner shall rejoice, for there is no sin in shadow or in light that the seeds of the dead cannot forgive. Near the top, the wind whistled down briskly, and he welcomed the chill, the way it told him a world existed outside of his mind, helped him deny these symptoms that had now crept back in. He felt a strong tidal pull, and a vibration that went with the pull, and he was burning up. Or was the lighthouse burning up? Because a glow awaited him at the top of the stairs, and not the faint green phosphorescence that now arose from the walls, the steps. No, this was a sharp light that knew its purpose. He could tell that already. He could tell that already. There we go. But it was not the light from the lens, and he hesitated just below the lantern room for a moment. He sagged onto a step, not sure he wanted to see what new beacon had supplanted the old. His hands shook. He trembled. Could not get old Jim's fingers out of his head, nor the words of the sermon that still uncurled all unbidden from his mind, that he could neither resist nor keep out. But this was his place now, and he could not abandon it. He rose. He turned. He walked into the lantern room. The rug had been moved. The trap door lay open. A light shone out from that space, a light that circled and curved even as it had the discipline not to trickle across the floor or refract off the ceiling, but instead mimicked a door, a wall, rising from the watchroom. Quietly, flare gun held tight, Saul crept closer to the edge of the trapdoor and the source of the light, while the feeling increased that the stairs behind him had grown stranger still, that he should not look back. Bending at the knees, he peered down into the watchroom, feeling the heat of that light crossing his face, his neck, singeing his beard. At first, all he saw was a vast mound of papers and what looked like notebooks that now rose from the watchroom, a great behemoth, a disheveled library of shadow and reflection that leapt into and out of focus. Ghosts and figments, curling and questing, there but not quite there. A record that he did not understand because it did not yet exist. Then his eyes adjusted, and the source of the light coalesced. A blossom. A pure white blossom with 8 petals, which had unfurled from the top of a familiar plant, whose roots disappeared into the papers below. The plant that had enticed him on the lighthouse lawn, so long ago, to reach down, drawn by a glitter, a gleam. An almost holy intensity rose from somewhere within and filled Saul up, along with a dizziness. Light was leaking out of him now, too, coursing down through the trap door to communicate with what lay below. And there came a sensation of something pulling him close, holding him tight, of recognizing him. In rebellion against that, he rose from his crouch, arms out to the side for balance, teetering there on the edge of the trap door, staring down into that swirl of petals until he could resist no more, was falling into the pure white corona of a circle of fire, into a congregation of flames, a burning so pure that turning to ash was a kind of relief, engulfed by light that consecrated not just him, but everything around him, anchoring receiver and received. There shall be a fire that knows your name, and in the presence of the strangling fruit, its dark flame shall acquire every part of you. When he regained consciousness, he was laying on the floor of the watchroom, on his back, looking up. There was no mound of notebooks. There was no flower. Just the bodies of Henry and Suzanne, with no apparent wounds upon them, expressions blank and more haunting because of it. He recoiled from them, crawled away from them, staring. In the shadows, there might have been what looked like the limp, desiccated remains of a plant, but he had no desire other than to leave that space. He clambered up the ladder. A figure in silhouette stood in front of the open door to the railing. A figure with a gun. Impossibly, it was Henry. "I thought you'd be gone longer, Saul," Henry said in a distant tone. "I thought you might not even come back tonight." That maybe you'd go over to Charlie's, except Charlie is out fishing, and Gloria's staying with her father. Not that she would be out this late anyway, or be of much help to you, but just so you know where we stand."
"You killed Suzanne,"
Saul said, unbelieving even now. "She wanted to kill me. She didn't believe in what I found. None of them believed. Not even you.
"You killed yourself."
Your twin. Knowing that, even if it made a difference, he couldn't reach his flare gun in time, or even make it 2 steps into a headlong flight down the stairs before Henry would shoot him, too. "A strange thing," Henry said. Where before he had been indistinct, hurting, in need of succor, now he had snapped back into focus. "A strange thing to kill yourself. I thought maybe it was a kind of wraith, but maybe Suzanne was right instead."
"Who are you?"
Ignoring him. "I found it, Saul, like I said I would. Or it found me. Only it wasn't what I thought. Do you know what it is, Saul?" Almost pleading. There was no good answer to Henry's question. He took 2 steps toward Henry, as if he were watching someone else do it. He was an albatross, floating motionless in a high above trough of air, gliding beneath the clouds with their dark underbellies, a coordinate of shadow and light that kept moving, a roving latitude and longitude, and far, far below stood Saul and Henry in the lantern room. Saul took a 3rd step, the plant a beacon in his head. A 4th step, and Henry shot him in the shoulder. The bullet penetrated and passed through, and Saul didn't feel a thing. Saul was still floating far above, intent on navigation, on riding thermals, an animal that hardly ever came down to land but just kept flying and flying. Saul rushed Henry, rammed his bleeding shoulder into Henry's chest, and the two of them staggered, grappling out the door and toward the railing, Henry's gun spinning out of his hand and across the floor. So close, staring into Henry's eyes, Saul had the sense of the man being at a remove, a time delay, a gap or distance between receipt, acknowledgement, and response, a message coming to him from very far away, as if Henry were dealing with some other, completely different situation, while on some level still able to appraise him, to judge him. "When you hide your face, they are terrified. When you take away their breath, they die and return to dust." Because Henry was drawing them both to the railing. Because Henry had a firm grip on him, and was drawing them both to the railing. Except Henry was saying to Saul, "What are you doing?" But Saul wasn't doing it, Henry was, and didn't seem to realize it.
"It's you,"
the albatross managed to say.
"You're doing it, not me."
"No, I'm not." Henry beyond panic now, writhing and trying to get loose, but still leading them to the railing, fast now, and Henry begging him to stop what he could not stop. Yet Henry's eyes did not send out the same message as his words. Henry hit the railing, hard, and Saul, a second later, swung to the side by momentum, and then they both went over, and only then, when it was too late, did Henry let go, the wind ripping screams from his throat, and Saul plummeted beside him through the cold, empty air, falling too fast, too far, while a part of him still looked down from above. The surf, like white flames surging and questing across the sand. "I am come to send fire on the earth, and what will I? And what will I, if it be already kindled?" The awful thud and crack when he hit. 0025. 25. Control. There came to Control, in that moment of extremity, almost unable to move, unable to speak, an overwhelming feeling of connection, that nothing was truly apart in the same way that he had found even the most random scrawl in the director's notes joined some greater. I somehow missed a line or misread the sentence. There came to Control, in that moment of extremity, almost unable to move, unable to speak, an overwhelming feeling of connection, that nothing was truly apart in the same way that he had found even the most random scrawl in the director's notes joined some greater pattern. And although the pressure was increasing and he was in a great deal of pain, the kind of pain that would not leave him soon, if ever, there arose a powerful music within him that he did not fully understand as he slipped and slid down the curving stairs, pulling himself at times, his left arm useless by his side, his father's carving clenched in a fist he could no longer feel, the brightness welling up through his mouth, his eyes, and filling him at the same time, as if the crawler had accelerated the process. He was slipping in part because he was changing. He knew that, could tell that he was no longer entirely human. Whitby was still with him, old friend, even if Lowry, too, chuckled and flailed somewhere in the background, and he clutched his father's carving to him as best as he was able, the only talisman he had left. This machine or creature or some combination of both that can manipulate molecules, that can store energy where it will, that can hide the bulk of its intent and its machinations from us. That lives with angels within it and with the vestiges of its own terroir, the hints of its homeland, to which it can never return because it no longer exists. And yet the crawler had used such a cheap trick. Control had seen his mother standing there, taken a grim and primal satisfaction in recognizing it as a delusion, one that held no dominion over him. A person he forgave, because how could he not forgive her, finally standing in such a place? Free, then, free even before the crawler had struck, had hurt him so badly. And even in that hurting, somehow Control knew that pain was incidental, not the crawler's intent. But nothing about language, about communication, could bridge the divide between human beings and Area X. That anything approaching a similarity would be some subset of Area X functioning at its most primitive level. A blade of grass, a blue heron, a velvet ant. He lost track of time and of the speed of his passage down, and of his transformation. He no longer knew whether he was still even a sliver of human by the time he, painfully, nauseated, crawling now, or was he loping, came down the most ancient of steps, of stairs, to the blinding white light at the bottom, shaped like the immortal plant, like a comet roaring there but stationary, and now his decision to push himself forward in the final extremity, to push through against that agony and that outward radiating command to turn back, and to enter. What? He did not know, except that the biologist had not made it this far, and he had. He had made it this far. Now, control fell away again. Now he was the son of a man who had been a sculptor and of a woman who lived in a Byzantine realm of secrets. His father's carving fell from his hand, clattered onto a step, came to a halt there on the stairs, alongside the signs and symbols left by his predecessors. A scrawling on the walls, an empty boot. He sniffed the air, felt under his paws the burning and heat, the intensity. This that was this was all that was left to him, and he would not now die on the steps. He would not suffer that final defeat. John Rodriguez elongated down the final stairs, jumped into the light. 0026. The Director. 2 weeks before the 12th expedition, the old battered cell phone comes home with you. You don't remember bringing it. You don't know why security didn't question it. It's just there, in your purse, and then on the kitchen counter. The usual suspects occur to you. Maybe Whitby's even stranger than you think, or Lowry's having a laugh at your expense. But what does it matter? You'll just bring it back in the morning. By then, the divide between work and home is long gone. You've brought files home, you've done work at home, scribbled things on scraps of paper and sometimes on leaves, the way you used to do as a kid. In part because you take delight in imagining Lowry receiving photographs of them in his reports, but also because those materials also but also because but also using those materials seems somehow safer, although you can't say why. Just a heightened sense of a touch roving among the files, a presence you can't pin down or quantify. An irrational thought, an idea that just came into your mind one night, working late. Going into the bathroom every so often to throw up, a side effect of the medication you are taking for the cancer. Apologizing to the janitor and saying any foolish thing you can think of other than that you were sick. I'm pregnant. Pregnant with cancer. Pregnant with possibility. It makes you laugh sometimes. Dear alcoholic veteran at the end of the bar, do you think you'd like to be a father? It's not a night for chippers, not a night for garrulous realtors and nodding drunks. You're tired from the additional training, which has required more travel up north to Central to participate with the rest of the expedition, and to receive your own training as expedition leader. To fully understand the use of hypnotic commands, to understand the importance, the specific details, of the black boxes with the red light that help to activate compliance. So instead of going out, you put on some music, then decide on television for a while because your brain is cooked. You hear a sound in the hallway, beyond the kitchen. Just something settling in the attic, but it makes you nervous. When you go look, there's nothing there, but you get your axe from where you keep it under the bed for home defense. Then return to the couch to watch a 30-year-old detective show filmed in the South. Lost places, locations that don't exist now, that will never come back. A landscape haunting you from the past. So many things gone, no longer there. During the car chases, you're watching the backgrounds like they're family photos you've never seen before. You nod off. You come to. You nod off again. Then you hear something creeping low and soft across the tiles of the kitchen, just out of view. A kind of terrified lurching shudder burns through you. There's a slow scuttle to the sound, so you can't really identify it, get a sense of what has crept into your house. You don't move for a very long time, waiting to hear more, not wanting to hear more. You think you might not ever get up, go to the kitchen, see what animal awaits you there. But it's still moving. It's still making noise, and you can't sit there forever. You can't just sit there. So you get up. You brandish the axe. You walk to the kitchen counter, lean on tiptoe to peer at the kitchen floor. But whatever it is has nudged up against the left side, out of view. You're going to have to walk around and confront it directly. There, scuttling across the floor, blind and querulous, is the old cell phone, scrabbling and bulky, trying to get away from you. Or trying to burrow into the cabinets, to hide there. Except it isn't moving now. It hasn't moved the entire time you've been staring at it. You look at the phone in shock for so many moments. Maybe from the surprise of it, or as a defense mechanism, all you can think is that your work has followed you home. All you can think of is the monstrous breach, either in reality or in your mind. With trembling hands you retrieve the cell phone from the floor, axe held ready in your other hand. It feels warm, the melted nature of the leather against the phone creating the texture of skin. You get a metal box you use for tax receipts, toss them into a plastic bag, put the phone inside, lock it, put it on the kitchen counter. You resist the urge to toss the box into your backyard, or to drive with it to the river and fling it into the darkness. Instead, you fumble for a cigar from the humidor buried underneath some clothes in your bedroom. The cigar you pull out is dry and flaking, but you don't care. You light it, go into your home office, shove the notes you've brought home into a plastic bag. Every unsupportable theory, every crazed journal rant rescued from old expedition accounts, every incomprehensible scrawling. Shove them in there with a vengeance, for some reason shouting at Lowry as you do so because he's peering into your thoughts on some mission of his own. You hiss at him. Stay the fuck away! Don't come in here! Except he already has, is the only person screwed up enough, knowing what he must know, to do this to you. There are notes you weren't sure you remembered writing, that you couldn't be sure had been there before. Were there too many notes? And if so, who has written the others? Did Whitby sneak into your office and create them, trying to help you? Forging your handwriting? You resist the urge to take the notes out of the bag, sort through them again, be pulled down by that horrible weight. You take the bag of crazy outside with a glass of red wine, stand there on the stone patio smoking while you turn on the grill, even though a storm's coming, even though you can feel the first raindrops. Wait a minute or two, then with a snarl, upend the bag onto the flames. You're a large, authoritative woman, standing in her backyard, burning a crapload of secret papers, of receipts, and other things that reflect the totality, the banality of your life, transformed into evidence by what you've scrawled there. Squirt lighter fluid over it to make it worse or better. Toss this ceaseless, inane, stupid, ridiculous, pathetic detritus on top of it. Light a match. Watch it all go up in a billowing, eye-watering, bile-like smoke. Curling and blackened, meaningless. It doesn't matter because there's still a flickering light in your head that you can't snuff out, a wavering candle distant in the darkness of a tunnel that was really a tower, that was a topographical anomaly, that was you reaching out to touch Saul Evans' face. It is all too much. You slump alongside the wall, watch as the flames rise up and then bank and are gone. It isn't enough. There's still more inside. On the side table by the couch, on the kitchen counter, on the mantel in the bedroom. You're awash in them, drowning in them. Down the slant of your backyard, the windows are lit up and a television is on. A man, a woman, and a boy and a girl on a couch seem sublimely calm, just sitting there, watching sports. Not talking, not doing anything but watching. Definitely not wanting to look in your direction as the raindrops thicken, proliferate, and your burning papers sizzle. What if you go back in, open that box, and the cell phone isn't a cell phone? What if containment is a joke? You can hardly contain yourself. What if you bring the cell phone back in and have it tested and nothing is out of the ordinary? Again. What if you go back in, the cell phone isn't ordinary, and you report that to Lowry and he laughs and calls you crazy? Or you tell Severance instead, and the cell phone is just sitting there, inert, and you're the compromised director of an agency that hasn't yet solved the central mystery around which its existence revolves? What if your cancer rises up and devours you before you get a chance to cross the border? Before you can escort the biologist across? You, with your cigar and your glass of wine and the music on the phonograph you turn up real loud, something you don't even remember buying, and the idea that somehow any of that will keep out the darkness, keep out the thoughts that through some electrified beatific gaze pinned you like a butterfly in a collector's display case of mediocrity. Let's see if I can do that without skipping a line. Uh, Part of it is that Jeff VanderMeer, when he decides I'm going to write a run-on sentence, really doesn't frig around. Part of it's that I skipped a line, I think. You, with your cigar and your glass of wine and the music on the phonograph you turn up real loud, something you don't even remember buying, and the idea that somehow any of that will keep out the darkness, keep out the thoughts that churn through your head. The cold regard that holds you as if God herself had, through some electrified beatific gaze, pinned you like a butterfly in a collector's display case of mediocrity. The storm comes on, and you toss your cigar, stand there thinking about the invisible border and all the ceaseless hypotheses that amount to some psychotic religion. And you drink your wine, hell, get the whole bottle, and it's still not doing it, and you still don't want to go inside to face anything. Tell me something I don't know! Tell me something I don't fucking know! You scream at the darkness and throw your glass into the night, and without meaning to, you're on your knees in the rain and the lightning and the mud, and you don't know if this is an act of defiance or an act of pain or just some selfish reflexive grace note. You truly don't know, any more than you know if that cell phone in there had actually moved, been alive. The burned notes are sopping now, falling in wet, stuck-together ash clumps off the edge of the overflowing grill. A few last sparks float in the air, winking out one by one. That's when you rise, finally. You rise out of the mud, in the rain, and you go back inside, and suddenly everything gets really cold and calm. The answer doesn't lie in your backyard, because no one is going to come and save you, even if you beg them to. Especially if you beg them to. You're on your own, like you've always been on your own. You have to keep going forward until you can't go forward anymore. You have to hang on. You're almost there. You can make it to the end. You stop investigating the S&SB. You stop investigating the lighthouse. You leave the notes that remain in your office, which you're well aware are legion, many more than what you'd burned at home in your pointless effort at catharsis. Ever had anyone try to burn a house down? You ask the realtor later that night, ducking in for a quick drink, a couple of cocktails that'll put you to sleep and then wake you up again, restless and turning endlessly in your bed in the middle of the night. The lights are dim, the TV a distant the lights are dim, the TV a silent glow, a distant hum, the stars in the ceiling glinting on and off from the roving flash of spotlights on the bowling lanes. Someone's playing a dark country western song on the jukebox, but it sounds distant, so far away. Something's moving through my heart. Sometimes I just have to play the part. Oh, sure, the realtor says, warming to her task. As the veteran, warming to her task, as the veteran, suddenly a wit, puts it. The usual kind of thing with arson for the insurance. Sometimes it's an ex trying to burn down the wife's house once her new boyfriend has moved in. But more times than you might think, you don't find any reason for it at all. I had one guy who'd got the urge just to start a fire one day, and he let it all go up in smoke and just stood there watching. Afterward, he was crying and wondering why he'd done it. He didn't know. There must have been a reason why he did it, though, I've always thought. Something he couldn't admit to himself, or something that he just didn't know. Anger tries to thrash its way free of you, manifests as a suspicion you've had for a while. You're not a realtor, you tell the woman. You're not really a realtor at all. She's a touch on some notes. She's a cell phone that won't sit still. You need some air. Walk outside, stand there in the gravel parking lot, under the uncertain illumination of a cracked street lamp. You can still hear the music blaring from inside. The street lamps shining down on you, and the solid bulk of the hippo on the edge of the miniature golf course, its enormous shape casting a wide oblong shadow. The hippo's eyes are blank glass, its gaping mouth a fathomless space you wouldn't put your hand into for all the free games chippers could give you. The veteran comes outside.
You're right. She's not a realtor, he tells you. She got fired. She hasn't had a job for more than a year.
That's okay, you say. I'm not a long-haul trucker either. Tragically, he asks you if you want to go back inside and dance. No, you don't want to dance. But it's okay if he leans against the hippo with you to talk for a while. About nothing in particular. About the ordinary, everyday things that elude you. The plant remains in the storage cathedral. Whitby's mouse remains in his attic for the most part. The last few days before the 12th expedition, the phone migrates to your desk as a secret memento. You don't know whether you're more concerned when it is with you or when it is out of your sight. Zero zero 27. The Lighthouse Keeper. Saul woke on his back beneath the lighthouse, covered in sand, Henry crumpled beside him. It was still night, the sky a deep, rich blue bleeding into black, but full of stars against that vast expanse. He must be dying, he knew, must be broken in 100 places. But he didn't feel broken. Instead, all he felt was a kind of restlessness, growing 100-fold now and nothing else behind it. No agony from the fall, from the searing pain of what must be several broken bones. None of that. Was he in shock? But still there was the rising brightness, and the night staring down with thousands of glistening eyes, the comforting husk and hush of the surf. And as he turned on his side to face the sea, the faint dark shadows of night herons, with their distinctive raised crests, stabbing at the tiny silver fish writhing in the wet sand. With a groan, anticipating a collapse that never came, Saul rose without a stagger or a swoon, dreadful strength coursing through him. Even his shoulder felt fine, uninjured or so badly injured and disoriented that he was nearing the end. Whatever was coming into his head was being translated into words, his distress expressed as language, and he clamped down on it again, because he knew somehow that to let it out was to give in, and that he might not have much time left. He looked up at the lantern room of the lighthouse, imagining again that fall. Something inside had saved him, protected him. By the time he'd hit the ground, he hadn't been himself. The plummet become a descent so gentle, so light, that it had been like a cocoon tenderly plummeting, kissing the sand. Come to rest as if locking into a position preordained for him. When he looked over at Henry, Saul could see, even in the dull darkness, that the man was still alive, that distant stare as locked and fixed on him as the stars above. That stare coming to Saul from across the centuries, across vast, unconquerable distances. Beatific and yet deadly. A scruffy assassin. A fallen angel ravaged by time. Saul didn't want that gaze upon him, walked a short distance away from Henry, down the beach, closer to the water. Charlie was somewhere out there in the sea, night fishing. He wanted Charlie close now, but also wanted him thrust far away, cast out, so that whatever had possessed him might not possess Charlie. He made his way to the ridge of rocks that Gloria liked to explore, to the tidal pools, and sat there, silent, recovering his sense of self. Out in the sea, he thought he could see the rippling backs of leviathans as they breached and then returned to the depths. There came the stench of oil and gasoline and chemicals, the sea coming almost up to his feet now. He could see that the beach was strewn with plastic and garbage and tarred bits of metal, barrels and culverts clotted with seaweed and barnacles. The remains of ships rising, too. Detritus that had never touched this coast, but was here now. Above, the stars seemed to be moving at a tremendous rate, through a moonless sky, and he could hear the thunderous screams of their passage, streaking faster and faster until the dark was dissolving into ribbons and streamers of light. Henry, like an awkward shadow, appeared at his side. But Saul wasn't frightened of Henry. "Am I dead?" he asked Henry. Henry said nothing. Then, after a moment, "You're not really Henry any more, are you?" No answer. "Who are you?" Henry looked over at Saul, looked away again. Charlie, in a boat, offshore, night fishing, far away from whatever this was, this sensation pushing out of him like a live thing, pushing harder and harder and harder. "Will I ever see Charlie again?" Henry turned away from Saul, began to walk down the beach, broken and stumbling. After a couple of steps, something further broke inside of him, and he fell to the sand, crawling for a few feet before he lay still. "And the hand of the sinner shall rejoice, for there is no sin in shadow or in light that the seeds of the dead cannot forgive." Something was about to crest like a wave. Something was about to come out of him. He felt weak and invincible all at once. Was this how it happened? Was this one of the ways God came for you? He did not want to leave the world, and yet he knew now that he was leaving it, or that it was leaving him. Saul managed to get into his pickup truck, could feel the sickness overflowing, knew that whatever was about to happen he would be unable to control, was beyond anyone's ability to control. He did not want it to happen there, on the coast, next to his lighthouse. Didn't want it to happen at all, but he knew the choice was not up to him. There were comets erupting in his head, and a vision of a terrible door, and what had come out of it. So he drove, down the rutted path, careening wildly at times, trying to escape himself even though that was impossible. Through the sleeping village, past dirt road after dirt road. Charlie out at sea. Thankfully not here. Head pounding. The shadows begetting shadows, and the words trying to erupt from his mouth now, urgent to come out of his mouth, a code he couldn't decipher. Feeling as if something had its attention upon him. Unable to escape the sensation of interference and transmittal, a communication pressing in on the edges of his brain. Until he couldn't drive any more, there in the most remote part of the forgotten coast. The parts of the pine forest no one claimed or wanted or lived in. Stopped, stumbled out, the shapes of the dark trees, the sound of owls, innumerable rustlings, a fox pausing to stare at him, unafraid, the stars above still swirling and streaking. A stumbling in the dark, scraping up against palmettos and tough scrub, pushing past the uprising of this undergrowth, a foot into black water and out again. The sharp scent of fox piss, the suggestion of an animal or animals watching him, trying now to hold his balance, trying to hold on to his wits. But a universe was opening up in his head, filled with images he couldn't understand. A flowering plant that could never die. A rain of white rabbits cut off in mid-leap. A woman reaching down to touch a starfish in a tidal pool. Green dust from a corpse blowing away in the wind. Henry standing atop the lighthouse, jerking and twitching, receiving a signal from very, very far away. A man stumbling through the forgotten coast in army fatigues, all of his comrades dead. And a light that found him from above, pinning him there, some vital transaction complete. The feel of wet dead leaves, the smell of a bonfire burning, the sound of a dog, distant, barking, the taste of dirt, and, overhead, the interlocking branches of the pines. There were strange, ruined cities rising from his head, and with them a sliver that promised salvation. And God said it was good. And God said, "Don't fight it." Except all that he wanted to do was fight it, holding on to Charlie, to Gloria, even to his father. His father preaching that inner glow, as of being taken up by something greater than himself, which language could not express. Finally, in that wilderness, Saul could go no farther. He was done, and he knew it, and he wept as he fell, and he felt the thing within him anchor him to the ground, as alien as any sensation he'd ever felt, and yet as familiar as if it had happened 100 times before. It was just a tiny thing, a splinter, and yet it was as large as entire worlds, and he was never going to understand it, even as it took him over. His last thoughts before the thoughts that were not his, that were never going to be his. Perhaps there is no shame in this. Perhaps I can bear this, fight this. To give in, but not give up. And projected back out behind him, toward the sea, Saul, unable to say the name, just 3 simple words that seemed so inadequate, and yet they were all he had left to use. Some time later he woke up. That winter morning the wind was cold against the collar of his coat as he trudged down the trail toward the lighthouse. There had been a storm the night before, and down and to his left the ocean lay gray and roiling against the dull blue of the sky, seen through the rustle and sway of the sea oats. Driftwood and bottles and faded white buoys and a dead hammerhead shark had washed up in the aftermath, tangled among snarls of seaweed, but no real damage either here or in the village. At his feet lay bramble and the thick gray of thistles that would bloom purple in the spring and summer. To his right the ponds were dark with the muttering complaints of grebes and buffleheads. Blackbirds plunged the thin branches of trees down, exploded upward in panic at his passage, settled back into garrulous communities. The brisk, fresh salt smell to the air had an edge of flame, a burning smell from some nearby house or still smoldering bonfire. Sorry, that last paragraph was rough because the 3 words one just hits me really hard. Like I'm misting up thinking about it. His last words. And they are not spoken, but you know what they are. No name, but the 3 words. Oy. One sec, give me a moment. I gotta get my composure back. Sorry about that. 0028. Ghost Bird. The crawler was behind them. The words were behind them. It was just a submerged tunnel on a warm day. It was just a forest. It was just a place they were walking out of. Ghostbird and Grace did not talk much as they walked. There wasn't much to say. Such a world lay between them now. She knew that Grace did not consider her quite human, yet something about her must reassure the woman enough to keep traveling with her, to trust her when she said that something had changed beyond the climate, that they should head for the border and see what that something was. The scent of pine pollen clung to the air, rich and golden and ripe. The wrens and yellow warblers chased each other through the bushes and trees. They encountered no one, and the animals. Whoops. Oh, I see. They encountered no one, and the animals, while not tame, seemed somehow unwary. Not wary of them, anyway. Ghostbird thought of control back there in the tunnel. What had he found down there? Had he found the true Area X, or had his death been the catalyst for the change she had felt, that manifested all around them? Even now she could not see Control clearly, knew only that his absence was a loss, a sadness to her. Had he been there? He had been there almost her entire life. The real, lived-in life she had now, not the one she had inherited. That still meant something. At the moment he had gone through the door so far below, she had seen him, and had felt the crawler's seekers fall away, the entire apparatus receding into the darkness after him. There had come a shuddering miniature earthquake, as the sides of the tunnel convulsed once, twice, and then were again still. Known that although nothing could be reversed, the director had been right. It could be changed. It could change. And that Control had added or subtracted something from an equation that was too complex for anyone to see the whole of. Perhaps the director had been right about the biologist, just not in the way she'd thought. The words from the wall still blazed across her thoughts, wrapped themselves around her like a shield. Ghostbird had walked up into the light to find Grace staring at her with fear, with suspicion, and she had smiled at Grace, had told her not to be afraid. Not to be afraid. Why be afraid of what you could not prevent? Did not want to prevent? Were they not evidence of survival? Were they not evidence of some kind? Both of them. There was nothing to warn anyone about. The world went on, even as it fell apart, changed irrevocably, became something strange and different. They walked. They camped for the night. They walked again at first light, the world ablaze with sunrise and the awakening of the landscape around them. There were no soldiers, no suggestion of a ribbon stitching through the sky. The winter weather had lifted, and it was hot. It was summer now in Area X. The present moments elongated, once past still ponds and into the final miles. She lived in the present by dint of blistered feet and chafed ankles and biting flies drawn to the sweat on her ears or forehead, and the parched feeling in her throat despite drinking water from her canteen. The sun had decided to lodge itself behind her eyes and shine out, so that the inside of her head felt burned. Every beautiful thing that lay ahead she knew she had seen at least once behind her. Eternity found in the repetition of Grace's steps, her sometimes halting steps, and the constant way and her sometimes halting steps, and the constant way the light gripped the ground and sent its heat back up at her. "Do you think the checkpoints are still manned?" Grace asked. Ghostbird did not reply. The question made no sense, but enough humanity remained to her that she didn't want to argue. The hegemony of what was real had been altered, or broken, forever. She would always know now the biologist's position, near or far, a beacon somewhere in her mind, a connection never closed. In the final miles to the old position of the border, The sun was so bright and hot that she felt a little delirious, even though she knew it was a mirage. She had water and was still hobbling through blisters and petty aches. How could the sun be so oppressive, and yet the scene so unbearably beautiful? If we do make it through, what do we tell them? Ghostbird doubted that there would be a them to tell. She longed now for Rock Bay, wished to see it through the eyes of Area X, wondered how it might have changed, how it might have remained the same. This was really her only goal, to return to a place that had been like the island was to the biologist. They reached where the old border had been, on the lip of the giant sinkhole. The white tents of the southern reach had turned dark green with mold and other organisms. The brick of the army outpost was half pulled down and sunken in as if some giant creature had attacked it. There were no soldiers, there were no checkpoints. She bent down to tighten the laces on her boots, a velvet ant beside her foot. From what seemed like a great distance, she heard a scrambling huff from the lush vegetation of the sinkhole. For an instant, some odd, broad-shouldered marmot pushed its face through the reeds, then saw her and hurriedly disappeared with a plop into the creek behind it, while she rose, amused. "What is it?" Grace asked from behind her. "Nothing. Nothing at all." Then she was walking again, laughing a bit. Everything was pressed out of her except a yearning for water and a clean shirt. Inexplicably, unaccountably happy, grinning even. A day later they reached the Southern Reach building. The swamp had crept up to the courtyard and seeped across the tiles, pushed up against the concrete steps leading inside. Storks and ibises had built nests on a roof that looked half caved in. The evidence of a fire that had burned itself out inside the building, somewhere near the science department, showed in scorch marks on the outer walls. From afar they could see no signs of human life, no shadow of the people Grace had known there. Behind them lay the holding pond and the scrawny pine strung with lights, now 2 feet taller than when Ghostbird had last seen it. By mutual unspoken decision they halted at the edge of the building. From there, a gash in the side showed them 3 floors of empty, debris-strewn rooms, and a greater darkness within. And a greater darkness within. There we go. They stood for a moment, hidden by the trees, and peered at those remains. Grace could not sense the way the building slowly took one breath and then another, the way it sighed. She could not sense the echo at the heart of the southern reach that told Ghostbird that this place had built its own ecology, its own biosphere. To disturb that, to enter, would be a mistake. The time for expeditions was over. They did not linger, look for survivors, or do any of the other usual or perhaps foolish things that they could have done. But now came the crucible. Now came the test. What if there is no world out there? Not as we know it. Or no way out to the world? Grace saying this, while existing in that moment in a world that was so rich and full. "We'll know soon enough," Ghostbird said, and took Grace's hand for a moment, squeezed it. Something in Ghostbird's expression must have calmed her, for Grace smiled, said, "Yes, we will. We'll know." Between them, they might know more than any person still living on Earth. It was just an ordinary day, another ordinary summer day. So they walked forward, throwing pebbles as they went, throwing pebbles to find the invisible outline of a border that might not exist anymore. They walked for a long time, throwing pebbles at the air. 000X, the director. You sit in the dark at your desk in the southern reach in the minutes before leaving for the 12th expedition, your backpack your bleh, your backpack beside you, the guns tucked into the outer mesh, safeties on, not loaded. You will leave it all a mess. The bookshelves have become overgrown. Your notes. I meant to put on another image. One sec. My bad. I knew I had a plan here. There we go. Just map things. You sit in the dark at your desk in the southern reach in the minutes before leaving for the 12th expedition, your backpack beside you, the guns tucked into the outer mesh, safeties on, not loaded. You will leave it all a mess. The bookshelves have become overgrown, your notes nothing anyone would recognize as an organized pattern. So many things that make no sense, or only make sense to you. Like a plant and a battered cell phone. Like a photograph on the wall from when you knew Saul Evans. Your letter to him is in your pocket. It feels awkward to you. It feels like trying to say something that needed to be said without words to someone who may no longer be able to read it. But perhaps, too, it is like the script on the walls of the tower. The words aren't important, but what's channeled through them is. Maybe the important thing is getting it out on the page so it can be there in your mind. You agonize for the 1000th time that your course of action is poorly thought out. You have a choice. You can let it all go on. You can let it all go on as it has before. Or you can do this thing that in just a short while will take you out of the dark, out of the silence, and on a path from which you cannot come back. Even if you make it back. Even if you make it back. There we go. Emphasis. You have already said all the things to Grace that you had to say to make it seem like it would be all right. All the things said to the beloved Mark to reassure her, to keep up morale, and you almost believe she believed it, for your sake. When I get back, when we solve this, when we... A pale, curious head peers in, turned at an angle. Whitby, the mouse peeking out from his shirt pocket, all ears and little black eyes and fragile hand-like paws. You feel suddenly old and helpless, and everything seems very far from you. The chair, the door beyond, the hall, and Whitby, a canyon yawning wide miles and miles away. Yawning wide, miles and miles away. There we go. You feel suddenly old and helpless, and everything seems very far from you. The chair, the door beyond, the hall, and Whitby, a canyon, yawning oh gosh, we did it again. And Whitby, a canyon, yawning wide, miles and miles away. You let out a little sob, a little attempt to draw in breath, reeling there in momentary panic in the garbage heap of your notes. And yet, under that, a core that must not yield. Help me up, Whitby, you tell him, and he does, the man stronger than he looks, holding you up even as you lean into him, looming over his slight frame. You sway there, looking down. Whitby has to stay behind, even as it all falls apart. As Whitby falls apart, because no one can withstand that vision for months, for years. But you have to ask it of him. You have no choice. Grace will run the agency. Whitby will be its recording, its witness. You have to write down whatever you see, your observations. It might still be important. You can hear the surf in your ears. You can see the lighthouse, the words on the wall in the tower. Whitby says nothing, just stares with his large eyes, but he doesn't need to. The fact that he stands there, silent, by your side, is enough. When you take the first steps toward the door, you feel the weight on your back and the weight of your decision. But you ignore it. You walk into the hallway. It is very late. The fluorescent lights seem dim, but a sickly heat comes off them, or from the vents, passing across the top of your head like a whisper. An unrecoverable reality. The night will be cool, and there might be the scent of honeysuckle in the air, even a half-remembered hint of salt spray, and it will seem to take no time at all, the familiar ride there, under the clear half-moon, and through the dark, submerged shapes of ruined buildings, with the other members of the 12th expedition. At the border, you enter the white tents of the Southern Reach Mission Control, and the linguist, the surveyor, the biologist, the anthropologist are escorted to their separate rooms for the final decontamination and conditioning process. Before long, you will be at the border, will be headed with as much grace as your tall, broad shape can manage toward the luminescence of the enormous door. You watch them all on the monitors. All but the linguist seem calm, movements relaxed and without evidence of jitters. The linguist is trembling and shivering. The linguist blinks at a rapid rate. Her lips move, but no words come out. The tech looks over at you for direction. "Let me go in there," you say.
We'll need to restart the process for her if you do.
"It's all right." And it is all right. You have enough resolve for both of you. For the moment. Carefully, you sit down across from the linguist. You are trying to banish thoughts of your first trip across the border, of how it affected Whitby, but it's Whitby's face you see right now, not Saul's, not your mother's. The human cost across the years, the lives lost and broken, the long grift, the contortions and the subterfuge, all of the lies, and for what? Lowry, back at his headquarters, unable to see the irony, lecturing you.
Only by identifying the dysfunction and disease within a system can we begin to marshal a response whose logic would be to abolish the problems themselves.
The linguist has been placed on a regimen of psychotropic drugs. She has been operated on, reconditioned, broken down, brainwashed, fed false information that runs counter to her own safety, built back up again, and all of this she has on some level known about, volunteered for. Lowry, finding in her story of lost family members on the Forgotten Coast the closest thing to a glorious surrogate. It's a kind of taunt to you, a kind of petulant message, and, Lowry believes, the ultimate expression of his art. His coiled weapon, so tense that she's unraveling right here in front of you. The last 11th's psychologist all over again, just from a different direction. Her face reflects a confusion of impulses, the mouth ticking open, wanting to speak but not knowing what to say. The eyes are squinting as if expecting some kind of blow, and she will not meet your gaze. She's scared, and she feels alone, and she's been betrayed before she's ever even set foot in Area X. You could still use her on the mission, could find a dozen ways to deploy her, even damaged. Fodder for whatever is waiting in the topographical anomaly. Fodder for Area X, a bit of misdirection for the other expedition members. But you want no distractions, not this way. It's just you. It's just the biologist. A plan that's really a guess in the dark, finding your way by feel. You lean close and you take the linguist's hand in both of yours. You're not going to ask her if she still wants to go, if she can do that. You're not going to order her to go. And by the time Lowry finds out what you've done, it will be too late. She stares at you with an eviscerated smile. "You can stand down," you tell her. "You can go home. And it's going to be okay. It will all be okay." With those words, The linguist recedes from you, gliding back into darkness. Her and the chair and the room, as if they were merely props, and you're above Area X again, floating over the reeds, down toward the beach, the surf beyond. The wind and the sun, the warmth of the air. The questioning is over. Area X is done with you, has taken every last little thing out of you, and there's a strange kind of peace in that. A backpack. The remains of a body. Your gun tossed into the surf. Your letter to Saul crumpled and tumbling across the dried seaweed and the sand. You are still there for a moment, looking out over the sea toward the lighthouse and the beautiful, awful brightness of the world. Before you are nowhere. Before you are everywhere. Dear Saul, I doubt you will ever read this letter. I don't know by what it means. Oh, dear Saul, I doubt you will ever read this letter. I don't know by what means it might get to you, or if you could even understand it now. But I wanted to write it, to make things clear, and so that you might know what you meant to me, even in such a short time. That you might know that I appreciated your gruffness and your consistency and your concern. That I understood what those things meant, and it was important to me. That it would have been important even if all the rest of this had not occurred. That you might know that it wasn't your fault. It wasn't anything you did. It wasn't anything other than bad luck, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, the same way it always happens, according to my dad. And I know this is true because it happened to me too, even though I chose a lot of what happened to me since. Whatever occurred back then, I know you tried your best, because you always did try your best. And I am trying my best too. Even if we don't always know what that means or how it will play out, you can get caught up in something that's beyond you and never understand why. The world we are a part of now is difficult to accept, unimaginably difficult. I don't know if I accept everything even now. I don't know how I can. But acceptance moves past denial, and maybe there's defiance in that too. I remember you, Saul. I remember the keeper of the light. I never did forget about you. I just took a long time coming back. Love, Gloria, who lived dangerous on the rocks and pestered you true. Sorry, losing it again. But wait, there's more! Acknowledgements. I'm incredibly thankful to Sean MacDonald for his support, suggestions, and edits, as well as his sense of humor. Thanks as well to the amazing staff at FSG and publicist Allison Sinclair for inspiring me to do better and work harder. I am indebted to my wife, Anne, for feedback and support throughout the writing of these novels. Thanks as well to the troika of first readers who stuck with me throughout the trilogy: Gregory Bossert, Barrett Ellingson, and Tessa Kum. Much appreciation to the many kindnesses of readers and reviewers worldwide. Finally, thanks to the people and landscapes of North Florida, including the St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge, for being an inspiration. And that is Acceptance by Jeff VanderMeer. Sorry about getting a tad emotional. There are some hard-hitting emotional moments in that one, even though they're I guess relatively benign. They still get me. Oy. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see what he does. There's like a paragraph up on his was a paragraph up on his Twitter from like 2, 3 years ago. Um, oh, I should probably read through the comments because I have not been reading those. I am so sorry. Looking forward to this all week. Not sure what the eyes wide emoticon is for specifically. Voice of the Crawler's text gives me the chills. I am channeling. I won't say who I'm channeling. There's that moment in Annihilation when the biologist remarks of the crawler's writing on the tower tunnel wall that the words continue without pause or break. Yes. There are the occasional comma in them, particularly in Acceptance. There's more punctuation in them because Saul is not quite the crawler yet. He is not an unending stream of whatever he is. Whatever he has become at that point, a conduit, a biblically accurate angel. Certainly his description is sort of similar to that. And yes, that is how VanderMeer writes too. Run on sentences without pause. He's self-aware. I hope he is. But yeah, the 3 words. I know in my heart of hearts, it's I love you. I know in my heart of hearts. That's what it is. It might not be. It might be God damn it, but I'm pretty sure it's not because he and Charlie had a good thing going. And it sucks that things went down the way they did. But them's the breaks. It still has a very hopeful and uplifting ending, even though the world has probably ended. So, what is Area X? Good question. As far as we know, it is basically its own little bubble of spacetime that may or may not take you to a completely different location somewhere else in the universe. We are reasonably confident, based on what Ghostbird has said, that it is the result of some alien built work of artifice that whose progenitor species was destroyed, and it's doing its best to, if not recreate that species, then at least the conditions from which its home came from. Maybe it destroyed its home origin. Who knows? Somehow it managed to get trapped inside um, trapped inside the lens at the lighthouse. It's not really sure how. It is higher dimensional than we are by a large margin. It is probably what we would recognize, what we would nearest recognize as God, or near as, damn it, some otherworldly entity or existence that we cannot possibly hope to comprehend. That much is fairly obvious even in the earlier books, but it's kind of hammered home here. Um, what else do we know? We know that if you we know that it can turn you into something that is kind of a reflection of yourself. It can turn anything into a reflection of itself. I think given what we learn in Acceptance, the moaning thing being the 11th expedition, the last 11th expedition's psychologist, and how they had been messed with by Lowry. The reason they turned out the way they did is because of Lowry messing with them. We have the biologist as a somewhat better example in that what happens to the biologist, I think, is very poetic in that she's become kind of this infinite observing creature. She's got eyes all over her body that are like hidden, some of which are underneath tidal pools looking out, which is great because it's like she just can keep watching tidal pools literally all the time because that's what she liked to do. She has become her own microcosm or environment. So all these nice little poetic touches that are hammered in. What I like best about the Area X trilogy is that it leaves. I think there's probably like a definite answer to most things in it, but it's delivered in such a way that it leaves a lot open to interpretation. And I'm kind of excited to hear what other people's interpretations of what's going on there are. Um, Certainly, the bubble dimension of Area X that people have been entering into has some massive time dilation going on. Of a, we know that. Let's see, how long? We don't know how long actually. Control was chasing after Ghostbird to jump into the ocean and get to Area X. We don't know how long they were doing that. That could have been as long as a month, but it's probably less than that. In any case, that amount of time plus their travel time to the island, which is pictured here, I believe, um, that I have here. Let me just make sure that that is, yeah, that's set to fit. It's cut off and cropped that way. Um, it was 3 years for Grace after everything went down. Dare we say that the biologist became her own terroir? Indeed, I believe we dare do. We do dare. We do dare. We do dare. We dare. Anyway, good stuff. I dig it. It is unlikely that I'll get around to reading Born or Dead Astronauts aloud because Born has a ton of word puns that I don't think are going to be easy to translate without me like stopping every time to explain them, which I've harped on before. I like that about the book. It's fun as hell to read. The reason we probably won't do Dead Astronauts is because that book baffles the absolute bejesus out of me. I am not 1,000% sure I understand what's going on, and it's written in a way that is very difficult to read aloud. Um, it's very strange. I need to reread it anyway, and I'll try and get around to that, but I don't know when that'll be. I may or may not read Ambergris. Ambergris, however that's pronounced. I think the S is silent. Or is it a hard S? I don't remember now. Anyway, I might get around to reading that. I have to actually reread it because it's been. I have to actually not reread it. I have to actually read it first. I've had it. I've had it to the side. It's this big, nice hardbound collection of the Ambergris books that he did, and eventually I'll get around to reading it. And I just haven't. I've had it for years now, um, and it's big, it's daunting, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But I would probably do that once I've read it and vetted it. Let's see. So next up, I am I here next week? I'm here next week, right? Yes, I'm here. Wait, yes, I am here next week. So I'll probably do short stories or something. Maybe I've got a short story collection by Peter Watts. I might do a couple selections from that, just to get us in the mood for when I come back after skipping a week for the 1st of September, where we'd start the final volume of the Rifters trilogy, Behemoth Book 2 Seppuku. And we will do that. So that's the near future. After that, probably short stories for a week or two or three or a couple, and then we'll get cracking on Hyperion, the Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons. I'm excited. After that, probably if I could only remember the third thing that people requested of me. I can't remember what it is, but all the three body problem I'll get around to. Requests are always welcome. So yeah, looking out. Probably going to start Hyperion sometime before the end of the year. But stuff takes time. Even when you're doing it at the kind of accelerated pace that this one was at, which was about 50 pages every single installment, which comes out to like 2.5 hours almost. But yeah, it's good fun. Jeff VanderMeer is fun to read. Um, Another one I kind of want to do is the Revisionaries, in a similar weird fiction vein, but there's a lot to keep track of there. It's got quite a few voices to work with. I think in terms of voices and content, Hyperion Cantos will be one of the most ambitious I've done. So I am, again, very excited for that. Anyway, I'm glad people dug it. I'm going to stop blathering. Um, if you didn't dig it, sorry. If you didn't like to hear a grown man start blubbering and I can't hold it together, just like at the end of Forrest Gump, literally every single time, I can't help it. Uh, I blubber at the end of Forrest Gump every time. It's when he starts talking to her. It just gets me every freaking time. Oy. Anyway, anyway, good stuff. Good stuff. If that strikes you as a sign of weakness, well, tough nuggins. Get the full package or nothing at all. Anyway, see you all later. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, stay sane, stay toasty or cool as per your preference or geolocation permits. Stay damp or dry as per your preference or geolocation permits. And as always, be decent to each other. It's what Area X would expect of you. Actually, Area X wouldn't expect or demand anything of you, but it's a good start, isn't it? Until next time. Bye. I'll get these set in their playlist probably this weekend, so that'll be all set. Yeah. Okay. Bye.